האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov, good evening, Dober V'Yetcher. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Bo. We're going to do the first half of Os Ches of section number 8. And before we begin, let's take a look at a few psukim from the Parsha. This is Perek Yud Beis. First of all, we'll do psukim Aleph through Gimel, and then skip just a little bit and do Pasuk Vav. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe v'el Aharon be'eretz Mitzrayim lemor. And Hashem spoke to Moshe and to Aharon in Eretz Mitzrayim, saying, HaChodesh hazeh lochem rosh chodashim. This month, meaning referring to the month of Nisan, should be for you the first of the months. Rishon hu lachem lechodshei hashana. It is the first of all of the months of the year. Dabru el kol adas Yisrael lemor. Speak to all of the congregation of Bnei Yisrael, saying, Be'asor lachodesh hazeh, on the 10th day of this month, of the 10th day of Nisan, ve'yikhu lohem ish se leves avos se laboyas. And every man should take a sheep for the house of his fathers, meaning for the family, sela bias, one sheep for each household. So this is this was what Hashem, the mitzvos, I should say, that Hashem gave, that spoke about to Moshe and Aaron on Rosh Chodesh Nisan in Mitzrayim. We're skipping to Pasuk Vav. V'hoyo lachem lemishmeres. And this sheep that you take on the 10th day of Nisan, that you purchase or take from the flock on the 10th day of Nisan, you should guard it ad arba asar yom lachodesh hazeh, until the 14th day of the month of Nisan. V'shachatu oso kol kahal adas Yisrael, and all of the congregation of the Jewish people should slaughter the sheep that they took on the 10th of Nisan. They should now do the shlita on the 14th of Nisan, bein ha'arboyim, in the afternoon. And then the Torah goes on to say that they eat the Korban Pesach, they roast it and they eat it that night, which was the night beginning the 15th of Nisan. So there's a whole lot of things going on, starting on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and then the 10th of Nisan, when they get the animal, and then the 14th when they do the shlita, and the 15th when they would eat it. Zera Shimshon is going to focus in on a few things. Why is Hashem telling Moshe and Aaron about this on Rosh Chodesh Nisan? And then why is he telling them to tell the Jewish people to pick out their sheep on the 14th, on the 10th of Nisan, which was a few days, several days before they would need to do the shlita, the slaughtering, and the achila, and the eating that night on the 15th. So why are things happening so early on these days? What's the significance of these days? Zera Shimshon Os Ches, section 8, Medrash Yalkut. The Medrash Yalkut Shimoni says, Be'asor lachodesh hazeh. On the pasuk, the Medrash comments on the pasuk about everyone taking the sheep on the 10th day, purchasing or taking a sheep from the flock on the 10th day of Nisan. Rabbi Chia b'shem Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Chia said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Lekichoso omda lahem bayarden. The taking of the sheep on the 10th of Nisan, or we could say the merit of that action, stood for the Jewish people. It protected the Jewish people when they crossed the Yarden. Va'achiloso amdo lahem bimei Haman. And eating the sheep on the 15th of Nisan stood, the merit of doing so stood and protected the Jewish people in the days of Haman. Ad kan Lishono, until here is a quote from the Yalkut Shimoni. Zera Shimshon says, Tema, this is bewildering. What connection could there possibly be to connect the Jewish people's taking a sheep on the 10th day of Nisan in Mitzrayim, when they were still in Mitzrayim, still in Egypt? How could that connect to events that took place when the Jewish people crossed the Yarden? Va'achiloso im Haman, and how could the eating of the Korban Pesach in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, have any connection to the events involving Haman in the Purim story so many centuries later? That's the basic foundational question. What in the world, what kind of connections does the Yalkut Shimoni want us to make between the events in Mitzrayim of taking the Korban Pesach, again, taking meaning purchasing or picking out one sheep from the flock to use for the Korban Pesach on the 10th of Nisan? How does that connect to the crossing of the Jordan River when the Jewish people entered under Yehoshua's leadership and entered the land of Israel? What's that connection? And what's the connection Yalkut Shimoni possibly wants us to make between the eating of the Korban Pesach on the 15th of Nisan and events that happened in the days of the Purim story with Haman? Omnam, however, Isa Besota Perak Zion. Zera Shimshon says there's something that we can deepen our understanding by looking at a Gemara in Maseches Sota. Odam Bayarden, while the Jewish people were still in the process of crossing the Jordan River, again, this is when Moshe had died at the end of the Torah, and they were poised on the banks of the Jordan River outside of Eretz Yisrael, or Eretz Canaan as it was known then. And then Sefer Yehoshua tells us that they crossed the Jordan River to enter Eretz Canaan. And that was the beginning of the Jewish people's entering and conquering and dividing up the land of Eretz Canaan, which became known as Eretz Yisrael later. So they were still in process of crossing the river. Amar lahem Yehoshua, when Yehoshua said to them, Du'u, you should know, she'al menas kein atem ovrim. It is on a specific condition that you are being allowed to cross the river. Al menas shetorishu yoshvei haaretz mipnechem. And the condition is that you must commit yourselves to forcibly conquer and take away the land from the inhabitants of the land. We know that there were powerful nations inhabiting the land, and Yoshua said, this is not a freebie. There's no such thing as a free lunch. You're crossing the Yarden today to come into the land, but you must commit that you're going to be willing to fight to conquer the land. It won't just be given to you. Kidichsiv, as the pasuk says, v'chule, etc., and the pasuk that's quoted in that Gemara is the pasuk in which Hashem says there's a mitzvah to go in and conquer the land of Israel. Ve'imatem osim kain mutav. If you do so, if you make a commitment now while you're crossing the Jordan River, the Nahar Yarden, if you make a commitment now that you're going to cross in and conquer the land and fight the inhabitants of the land and uproot them and take over the land, mutav, good, that's great. V'im lav, but if not, mayim boim, water will come down, v'shotfim eschem, and wipe you away and sweep you away. So realize that you need to make this commitment, otherwise the people will not be able to successfully cross the Yarden, the Jordan River, into Eretz Yisrael. They'll be swept away unless they made the commitment to fight and conquer the land. Ad kan Lashono, until here is a quote from the Gemara in Maseches Sota. Next paragraph. V'kosha al Yehoshua. And we have a problem on what Yehoshua said, according to the Gemara. V'chisalka datoch sheYisrael be'odam bayarden b'mokom sakona yomru lav. Would anyone ever think that the Jewish people, while they were still in the process of crossing the Yarden, the river, in a situation of danger, Yomru Lav, they might say no to Yehoshua. What's the possibility that the water's all around them and they know they could be swept away? And they're going to say, nope, we're not listening to Yoshua. We're not going to commit to conquer and fight for the land. Certainly, in order to be saved from that dangerous situation of crossing the river, Yom Ruhin, they're going to say, yes, I'll call Masha Yomar Yehoshua on anything that Yoshua, on everything that Yoshua would say. It's an automatic, it's a given that they're going to say, yes, 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 whatever you say, Yoshua, just get us through the river. Ve'enzo hochacha, and there's no proof in this, she Yisrael achar kach ya'asu oso hadover, that Bnei Yisrael would in fact carry out Yehoshua's command to them to fight and conquer the land. There's no proof from the fact that they said they would do it, ki chen derech b'nei adam, because this is human nature. This is how people act. Kishehem b'sakana nodrim harbe. Very often when they're in danger, they take lots of vows. Uchashe'avro hatzara, and when the danger passes, kama pa'amim einam mishalmim. Many times they don't fulfill their vows. So a person in danger, like that old saying, there's no atheist in a foxhole, suddenly this person who never thinks about God or prays or does anything related to God, he's in a foxhole, the bullets are flying over his head, and he's saying, oh yes, God, save me, I'll do whatever you want. That's what the Zera Shimshon is saying. People in danger make all kinds of commitments. They take all kinds of vows to improve their actions and do all kinds of things. And then the danger passes and they see they're okay and they don't fulfill the vows. V'im kain, if so, Yehoshua should have been concerned. Pen la'achar mikain yisyoru Yisrael min ha'amim. Perhaps after the Jews crossed the Jordan and now they weren't in danger anymore, they would feel fear of the nations, the inhabitants of the land of Eretz Canaan, who they needed to fight and defeat. V'lo yivtechu b'HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they wouldn't have sufficient trust in Hashem. Uma hoil b'takonoso. So how effective would his plan be of getting them to commit to conquer the land when they're crossing the river and will say anything to get across? So that's the question on what Yehoshua said to the people when they were crossing the Jordan River to enter the land of Israel, according to the Gemara in Maseches Sota. Next paragraph. Ve'od yesh lehakshos, and there's another question that we need to ask. What need was there for the Jewish people to commit to anything in order to increase their merit while they were crossing the Yarden? In Yisrael be'osa shah hayu muchonim uzrizim lasos ritzon HaKadosh Baruch Hu ritzon Yoshua. If we know from looking at the text in Sefer Yehoshua, when we look at the psukim, we see the Jewish people were ready and anxious to do the Ratzon, the will of Hashem, and the will of Yoshua. The Jewish people were on a very high level of motivation at the time when they entered Eretz Yisrael under Yoshua's leadership. Kemosha Amar HaKosuv, as the pasuk says, quoting the people, El kol asher tishalchenu nelech. Everywhere you send us, we'll go. Whatever you tell us to do, Yoshua, we'll go and we'll do it. Kasher hoya I Moshe, just like we were with Moshe, so too we will be with you, Yehoshua. So the people were highly dedicated and highly motivated to follow Hashem and to follow Yehoshua's leadership. And therefore, that should have been enough. But for some reason, apparently, Yoshua felt that they needed a specific merit, a specific zuchus, in order to be protected when they were crossing the Yarden. And that's why he said to them, everyone, as you're crossing the Yarden, make a commitment right now, shout it loud, and say you're going to commit to fight the the nations of the land and conquer them. And you realize that that's part of coming in. That's the condition of coming into Eretz Yisrael, is you have to be willing to fight the inhabitants of the land and to defeat them in battle and to uproot them and to conquer the land. And Yoshua felt they needed to have a special merit. And so he told them, say that, feel that, commit to that as you're crossing. Why was that necessary? Top of the next column on the left. The Yesh Lomar. And so just to make sure we're all on the same page, until this point, the Zera Shimshon has not even begun to address his original questions. He asked an original question about the mysterious statements in the Yalkut Shimoni connecting events in Mitzrayim to events that happened later. And then he brought in a Gemara from Sota on which he posed more questions. And as he often does, in answering the later questions, he'll develop ideas which he'll use to go back and answer and resolve the earlier difficulties. So now, column on the left, Yesh Lomar, and we can say, the Isa b'Medrash Tanchuma, it states in the Medrash Tanchuma, Huva b'Kli Yakar Sham, that's brought in the Kli Yakar commentary there, Shekriyas hayardein hoyasa bizuchuso shel Avraham. The splitting of the Jordan River, when the Jewish people crossed over, again, under Yoshua's leadership to enter the land, that splitting was in the merit of Avraham Avinu. It didn't just happen. Now, this is a reference to the fact that in Sefer Yehoshua, in the beginning of Sefer Yehoshua, we are told that a great miracle happened. And when the Jewish people came to the Yarden and were ready to cross it, and it's split for them, just like when they left Mitzrayim, the Yam Suf split for them. So the Yarden, the Jordan River, split for them. And that miracle, the Medrash Tanchuma tells us, Chazal tell us, was in the merit of Avram Avinu. Shenemar, as the Pasuk says, Me Adam Ha'ir Asher Mitzad Sartan. When the Pasuk in Yoshua describes the Jewish people crossing the Jordan River, it says that they were far from the city of Adam, which was a city that was next to another city called Sartan. Shamata miyamecha ir nikres Adam. So the Medrash Tanchuma asks, has anyone ever heard of a city called Adam? Why are they saying there's a city called Adam? And that's and he's using that city to describe the place where the Jewish people crossed, Bnei Yisrael crossed the Yarden, the Jordan River. Ella al Avraham Nemar, but this word Adam was used to refer to Avram Avinu. Shenemar, as another pasuk later in Yehoshua says, Ha-Adam ha-Godol ba'anokim, the man, the Adam, who was the greatest of the giants. Now that pasuk on its own, if you read that pasuk on its own, it seems to be it's talking about Kiryat Arba. It says that the city of Hebron, and it's talking about the city of Hebron and how it was promised to Kalev, the good spy, Kalev ben Yefuneh. And in Sefer Yoshua, it talks about Kalev coming forward and saying, I'm still alive and I'm here. And Moshe had promised me that because I was a good spy and I trusted in Hashem, I would receive this area, this city of Hebron, and Yoshua gives it to him. So it says Hebron was originally called Kiryat Arba, and then it says Ha'adam Hagodol Ba'anokim. Arba apparently was the name of the greatest, the tallest, the biggest of the giants. So it doesn't seem to be on face value a reference to Avram Avinu, but in the Medrash they say that word Adam is referring, or you might say also referring on a deeper level, to Avraham, who of course was buried in the Maras HaMachpelah, which he purchased to bury his wife Sarah when she died, and then he was buried there himself. And so Adam refers to Avraham, and therefore when it says the Jewish people crossed the Jordan River near the city of Adam, or not too far from the city of Adam, that, according to the Medrash Tanchuma, was alluding to the fact that the merit that they needed to have the river split for them was in the merit of Avraham Avinu. Ve'im kain, and if so, im hoya lahem la'avor es hayarden b'zchuso shel Avraham, if they were crossing the Jordan River, the Yarden, in the merit of Avraham, min haroi hoya sheyeh lahem mitachila, then it would have been appropriate, one would think, that before they crossed Chosamo shel Avraham, they should have the seal of Avraham, the special mitzvah of Avraham, the Hainu Hamila, which is the circumcision, the bris milah, vehem hayu arelim. But many of the Jews at that point were not circumcised; they were uncircumcised. Kedichsiv, as another pasuk in Yehoshua says, ki arelim hayu. Yehoshua performed a mass circumcision ceremony once the Jewish people crossed into Eretz Canaan, because they were arelim, they were uncircumcised. They had not performed circumcisions, bris milah, in the Midbar during 40 years. So you had 40 years of traveling in the wilderness in which male babies were not circumcised. So Yehoshua circumcised everybody after they crossed the river, but not before. So it doesn't seem appropriate that the people could benefit from the merit of Avraham, the founder of the Jewish people, but also the first person to receive the mitzvah of bris milah, that they could cross the Jordan River based on the merit of Avraham when they were not circumcised. They hadn't practiced the Avraham's mitzvah of milah during the years in the Midbar. So that wouldn't seem to make sense. V'chein bizman Yitzias Mitzrayim. Next paragraph. Similarly, at the time of Yitzias Mitzrayim, so the Zera Shimshon saying, let's leave in our minds the Jewish people crossing the Yarden, the Jordan River, and we're told it's in the merit of Avram Avinu, but realize that we have a problem, which is that they weren't circumcised. And if they wanted to utilize the merit of Avram Avinu, shouldn't they have been circumcised? Shouldn't they have done the mass circumcision ceremonies that were done later? Shouldn't they have done that before they crossed the Yarden in order to truly be able to benefit from the merit of Avram Avinu? Let's leave that question in the air, so to speak, because the Zera Shimshon will, of course, come back to it. V'chein bizman Yitzias Mitzrayim, and similarly at the time of leaving Egypt, Amar lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem said to them, Im ein chosamo shel Avraham bivisarchem, if you don't have the special seal, the special mitzvah of Avraham in your flesh, physically, ein atem yotzi mikan la'olam, you'll never be able to leave Mitzrayim. So this is such an important teaching, an amazing teaching of Chazal, that Hashem said, those who are not circumcised are not going to be able to leave Mitzrayim. Lefi shahayu lahem lotzeis b'zechuso shel Avraham. Again, because they needed the merit of Avram Avinu, of their ancestor Avram, to be able to leave Mitzrayim. And to have that merit, they needed to be circumcised. Kedichsiv, as the pasuk in Tehillim says, Ki zochar es devar kodsho es Avraham avdo. Hashem remembered the matter of his Holy One, Avraham, his servant. Vayotzi amo bisoson, and Hashem took out his people with joy. And then it continues, and with rina, and with joy, and with singing, v'chule, etc. Umishum hachi hutzrechu l'siyua, and because of this, they needed assistance. Shelekichas haPesach shel Mitzrayim Omdo lohem bayardain. The Jewish people needed special merit to be able to leave Mitzrayim and to cross the Jordan River, because it wasn't enough just to have the merit of Avram Avinu unless they had other merits. So in Mitzrayim, as we're going to see, the Jewish people circumcised themselves before they left, and that was specifically allowed them to eat the Korban Pesach. A person who is not circumcised is not allowed to partake of the Korban Pesach. That's specifically stated actually in our Parsha when it talks about the Korban Pesach. So we know that they circumcised themselves in Mitzrayim, and they needed to be circumcised to utilize the merit of Avram Avinu to be able to leave Mitzrayim. And then later, when they were crossing the Yarden, it's true, they didn't have the circumcision that they needed until later. So that's why Yehoshua, circling back, that's why Yehoshua he understood that they needed a special merit to be able to get through the river and have it stay split for them. It wasn't just enough to say this is in the merit of Avram Avinu. They weren't circumcised. They needed another merit. What was that merit? Their commitment to come into the land and conquer the land. Next paragraph. V'hainu she'HaKadosh Baruch Hu tziva leMoshe b'Rosh Chodesh. And this is what why Hashem commanded to Moshe on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Shebe'asur lachodesh yikchu lahem ish sel leves avos. Specifically on the 10th day of the month of Nisan, again, several days before they would need the animal, Hashem said, I want them 4 days before they're going to slaughter the animal, I want them to go pick out an animal. V'tziva gamkein leMoshe uliyaron sheyedabru liyisrael zos mitzvah b'Rosh Chodesh. And Hashem wanted the people to hear about this mitzvah on Rosh Chodesh, which was a full 14 days before they were going to sacrifice the animal. So something's going on here with the fact that 14 days before they need to have the animal ready for shechita and achila, for slaughtering and eating, they need to hear the mitzvah, which was on Rosh Chodesh. And 4 days before, on the 10th of Nisan, is when they need to go get the animal. Why is there a mitzvah to be in such a rush? Kemoshe Amru Zichron Levracha, as Chazal say, this is also from a piece in the Yalkut Shimoni, Medrash, Al Pasuk Dabru El Kol Adas Yisrael, speak to all of Bnei Yisrael, Vikoshe. This is difficult. Lama rotza shia dafka halakicha be'asur. Why did they specifically need to take the animal, again, purchase an animal or pick out an animal for the Korban Pesach on the 10th of Nisan? Why couldn't they do it on the 11th or the 12th or the 13th or the 14th for that matter, when they weren't going to need it until the 14th of Nisan when they would slaughter it? Why 4 days earlier were they told you need to go pick out an animal? Mashelotziva b'Pesach Doros, that particular command to go pick out an animal and have it ready 4 days early on the 10th of Nisan, that was only talked about, that was only commanded when the Jews were in Mitzrayim. That did not become something that needed to be done in all future years when Jewish people kept and fulfilled the mitzvah of the Korban Pesach in future generations. They could get the animal right before. They didn't have to get an animal on the 10th of Nisan, 4 days early. And why did they have to hear about this commandment on the 10th of Nisan, 14 days earlier? So something is going on with the dates, as we mentioned previously. What is it? Next paragraph, or on the next page, column on the right. V'seiretz ha'al-sheikh. The commentary of the al-sheikh answers these questions, and he says, Shelefi, meaning the question specifically about the dates. Why did they have to hear about these mitzvahs on Rosh Chodesh? Why did they have to take an animal on the 10th of Nisan when they didn't need it for 4 more days? Shelefi shehoyu Yisrael mishuka'im betuma, since the Jewish people, when they were in Mitzrayim, were completely in the depths of impurity. Rotza litein lahem asara yomim. Hashem wanted to give the people 10 days. Kedei sheyafrishu es atzma mikol eser madregos hatuma, in order to separate themselves from all 10 of the different levels of impurity. Now we know, and we've talked about it previously, that the Jewish people were sunk up to the 49th level of Tuma, another teaching from the Midrashim from Chazal. But the Al-Sheikh talks about a different concept, a different measurement, so to speak, of impurity. And he says the Jewish people were sunk at down 10 levels of impurity, and therefore Hashem wanted to give them 10 days to begin day by day to separate themselves from and pull themselves out of the impurity. And after 10 days, meaning starting from Rosh Chodesh Nisan, when they received the mitzvos of the Korban Pesach, 10 days later, on the 10th of Nisan, Nosan Lohem Arba Yomim, he gave them 4 more days, Kedei Sheyidavku B'Kedusha, in order to cling to holiness. They've separated themselves from Tuma for 10 days, from impurity, and now they're ready. Once they did that and went through that, and they've pulled themselves out of the impurity, now they're ready to cling to the holiness and cling to Hashem's mitzvos for 4 days. Dehainu ba'arba osio shem hamiyuchad, and this represents or is represented by the 4 names of Hashem's unique name. That's the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, the name of Hashem that we never say. And now that they've gone through those 14 days of preparation, they're ready to sacrifice the Korban Pesach on the 14th day of Nisan. And now that they've done that, they had their own merit, mitzoraf lezuchuso shel Avram, which could be combined with the merit of Avram Avinu. So now the pieces are beginning to come together. So let's go back, pause to understand exactly this amazing teaching of the Al-Sheikh, of the commentary of the Al-Sheikh. He says we should never, ever ignore the dates that were involved in our Parsha, Parsha's Bo, in the mitzvos having to do with the Korban Pesach. Hashem comes on Rosh Chodesh Nisan and says 14 days again before they need the animal, and says, okay, Moshe and Aaron, tell the people that 10 days from now on the 10th day, I want them to go buy or pick out an animal, and then hold on and protect and guard that animal so it doesn't receive a blemish for 4 days until they can actually slaughter the animal and bring the Korban Pesach. Why? So Rosh Chodesh Hashem wanted them to have 10 days to prepare for this big, huge event, this huge mitzvah event, and 10 days of pulling themselves out of tumah, of impurity. Then on the 10th day, they go and they pick out the animal. And for 4 days, by guarding the animal and making sure it doesn't receive a blemish, and thinking and preparing for the mitzvah, learning all of the laws and rules and details of the mitzvah of slaughtering and eating the animal on the 14th, slaughtering it on the 14th, eating it on the 15th, that is going to help them connect and cling and join to Kedusha, to holiness, and then they will be ready. So that's why things were given to them so early. These commandments were given to them so early. 14 days before they heard about it, 10th day, they pick out the animal. On the 14th, they're ready to slaughter it. And on the 15th, they're ready to eat it. So clearly, they needed lots of merits, and they couldn't just rely on the merit of Avram Avinu to leave Mitzrayim. Next paragraph. Uvoze yuvana kosav ki zochar es devarkajo es Avram avdo vayotzi amo bisaso. Now we can understand the pasuk in Tehillim that was quoted previously, where it says, where David HaMelech says, Hashem remembered Avraham his servant and took out the people from Egypt with joy and with singing. That's why it mentions Avram Avinu. Dema ichpasim hotziam b'sasan uverina. Why does the pasuk specifically mention they came out with joy and with singing? Why is that relevant to us? Why is that important enough to be mentioned? The ode and more, and another question, the pshita. It's obvious that when they were being taken out from bondage and slavery to redemption, that they were going to be happy, rejoicing, and singing. So number one, it's obvious. You don't need to tell us. And number two, even if you don't think it's so obvious, why do we specifically need to know they came out with sason and rina, with rejoicing and singing? Elakach Perusho, next paragraph, but this is the explanation of that pasuk in Tehillim. Lefisha Zochor es Tavar Kodsho es Avram Avdo, because Hashem remembered the matter of Avram his servant, Ilu Hoya Motzion Bizuchuso Shel Avraham Levad. If Hashem had hypothetically taken out the Jewish people and said, you're only being redeemed through the merit of Avraham. Nothing to do with your own actions, nothing to do with your own zechuyos, your own merits. If that's the way Hashem had handled things, the Jewish people would have been embarrassed. They would have been ashamed. And they wouldn't have been so happy, even though they were coming out of Mitzrayim. Demand de ochil de lav delay. Because a person, this is a quote from a statement by Chazal in the Yerushalmi, because a person who eats something that doesn't belong to him, bahil istakole be'ape, he's embarrassed to look at the face of the person who's giving him the food. When we are given food by someone, especially if they're giving us as charity or they think we don't have enough food to eat, but even just in general, we're eating food that we didn't work for, we didn't do anything for. If that happens, we're a little bit embarrassed in front of the person giving it to us, in front of our benefactor. And because of that phenomenon, Hashem didn't want the Jewish people to be the least bit embarrassed and rely on the zchus of Abraham. So therefore, he gave them the mitzvah of taking the Korban Pesach even before they did the Bris Milah. The taking of the Korban Pesach on the 10th of Nisan happened before the Bris Milah, which only took place on the 14th of Nisan in Mitzrayim. In order for the Jewish people to have the great merit, al kiyum devoro shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that they were willing to risk their lives to fulfill the word of Hashem. How were they risking their lives? Because we all know the famous story. The Egyptians worshipped sheep. And therefore, when the Jewish people started going around and purchasing sheep from the Egyptians and setting aside sheep, and the Egyptians said, what are the Jews? What are you doing? Why are all of you going and purchasing or picking out a sheep from the flock? What are you doing? And they said, well, 4 days from now, we're going to be sacrificing these sheep because that's what our God Hashem commanded us. The Egyptians were incensed and angry, and they could have harmed the Jews, God forbid. They could have killed the Jews over this offense of taking an Egyptian deity that they worshipped and killing it. But they did it anyway, and that mesiras nefesh, that risking of their lives to do the ratzon of Hashem, brought them tremendous merit, and that happened already before the mitzvah of circumcision, which brought them the merit of Avram Avinu. Hashem did not want them to completely rely only on the merit of Avram Avinu. Hashem wanted them to have their own merits, and they got their merits through what? Through lekicha, taking an animal, picking it out, guarding and watching it, and slaughtering it, and the mitzvos involved with eating it, and actually all the mitzvos of the Seder on the 15th of Nisan. Next paragraph. Even though the primary merit of the Jewish people being able to leave Mitzrayim was in the merit of Avraham, im kol zeh, nonetheless, yotzu b'sason uverina. Next, top of the next column. They left with simcha, with joy, and with singing, as the pasuk said in Tehillim. Lefisha af kodem amilo mosru atzmon, because even before the mitzvah of circumcision on the 14th of Nisan, they had risked their lives on the 10th of Nisan because of Hashem's mitzvos. V'zehu vayotzi imo b'sason. This is what the pasuk in Tehillim means, that Hashem took them out with joy. Dahainu ha'hed yotim shelo hayu lahem rak zeh haschus. The word sason, joy, is a reference to the regular people who only had one merit, the merit of picking out the sheep and getting ready for the Korban Pesach. They didn't have a lot of other mitzvos that they were doing. They didn't have a lot of other zechuyos of merits. Va'acher kach barina es bechirov. And the pasuk, after talking about leaving in joy, says, and they were singing, the chosen ones of Hashem, the more righteous people, not only were joyous, they were singing. Shahoyu lahem gam zechuyos acherim. They had other merits. They were careful about doing other things to serve Hashem. V'hoyu lahem rina, and they not only had joy, but they had singing. Sheharino hu kishe'odam mashmiya la'acher simchaso. Rina refers to a joy that's so powerful that a person sings and rejoices and tells other people about it. V'hu yoser gadol mehasason. Rina is even a greater joy than sason, than rejoicing. Shahayu beinam levein atzmam. The word sason refers to feeling joy by yourself, for yourself, which is a wonderful feeling. But when you feel rina, not only are you joyous, but you're sharing your joy. You're bubbling over and sharing it and singing about it, and other people are aware of it as well. Nachzor in Yonenu. Now the Zera Shimshon says, let's return to our subjects that we talked about before. Let's get back on track to answering our questions. She Yisrael Mosru Atzmam, the Jewish people risked their lives, V'lokhu Pesach Bizrizus Kodem Amila, and they ran in hurry to get their Pesach animals before they did Bris Milah, meaning on the 10th of Nisan. V'lo here Haru Klal, and they didn't even give it a second thought. Afal gav de shechia chazeka, even though they put them in a lot of danger. Shehoya to'avas mitzrayim, because as we said, the sheep was the animal that was worshipped, one of the animals that the Egyptians worshipped as a deity. V'nas elahem hanes b'zechuso shel Avraham, and a miracle was done for them that they weren't harmed in the merit of Avraham. Even though they weren't yet circumcised. On the 10th of Nisan, the Jewish people hadn't yet been circumcised, which only took place on the 14th of Nisan, when they slaughtered the Korban Pesach and got ready to eat it. So nonetheless, the merit of Abraham was already protecting the people when they started picking out and purchasing the sheep. Lefisha sofam lomol acherkach, because they were going to circumcise themselves later. Very important point. Hashem looked at the Jewish people and knew that they were going to do Milah on the 14th of Nisan, and therefore, so to speak, he took the merit of Avraham, which could only really come to them in full force if they were circumcised, and brought it back a few days to protect them on the 10th of Nisan, when they started getting the sheep ready and preparing them. He brought the merit of Avraham to protect them from the Egyptians already 4 days earlier on the 10th of Nisan. And by getting the animals ready on that day and risking their lives to do so, they brought themselves tremendous merit, so that their merit, and combined with the merit of Avraham Avinu, would bring them to the point of being able to leave Mitzrayim. Umitam zeh av keshehoyu bayarden. Along these same lines, and now we need to realize Zera Shimshon circling back to one of his original questions. Along these same lines, when the Jewish people were crossing the Jordan River, Af al Gav Shehoyu Arelim, even though they were uncircumcised, Ru'uyim Heim Lehinotzel Bezechuso Shel Avraham, they were fit to be saved by the merit of Avraham, Shahare Sofam Lamol Miyad, because they were going in the end to be circumcised immediately, meaning as they're crossing the river, they get the merit of Avraham, even though they were not circumcised, because very shortly thereafter, once they crossed in, there was going to be this national ceremony of bris milah, of circumcision. Just like we see in Sefer Yehoshua, Hashem commanded them to do the mitzvah of milah right after crossing the river. And in order that the Jewish people would not think that, okay, we're good, we're crossing the river in the merit of Abraham, and we're okay with Abraham's merit because we're about to do the mitzvah of milah la'achar sheyotzu min hayarden, after they came out of the Jordan, v'sulo, and in order for them to not think that they didn't need other merit, mishum hachi amar lahem Yoshua, because of that, Yoshua said to them, be'es ovrim es hayarden, at the time they were crossing the Jordan, al manas kein atem ovrim, on this condition you are crossing the river, she'im yikablu aleihem lahorish, if you accept and commit yourself to uproot and destroy the inhabitants of the land, the enemies, this commitment will give you your own merit, which you can combine with the merit of Avram Avinu, kemo shehayu b'Mitzrayim, just like it was back in Egypt. So amazing when we think about the fact that the day that the Jewish people crossed the Yarden was the 10th of Nisan. So the exact same process that took place in Mitzrayim, where the 10th of Nisan, the going and the picking out and the purchasing of the animals to get ready to prepare for the mitzvah of the Korban Pesach, brought the Jewish people their own zechus, their own merit, that they then could combine to receive the merit of Avram Avinu. And it protected them from the Egyptians, even though they hadn't yet been circumcised. The exact same thing happened on the 10th of Nisan when they crossed the Jordan River, and they didn't have the merit of circumcision yet, but they had the merit of committing to conquer the land and to be willing to fight to conquer the land, which is exactly what Yoshua told them to commit to, and to understand that commitment and to accept it fully when they were crossing the Jordan River. And that's what gave them the merit to cross the Jordan River. They had their own zechus combined with the zechus of Avram Avinu, and all of that led up to doing the mitzvah of milah later. And Hashem pulled back the mitzvah of the merit of milah from when it happened. He pulled it back to protect them when they were crossing the river, because they had their own merit from making the commitment to fight and to conquer the land. So we're going to stop here. The Zera Shimshon has a lot more to talk about. We know that he hasn't answered all of his questions, especially we know he started off with a question about the Yalkut Shimoni connecting the events in Mitzrayim to the time of Haman in the Purim story. He hasn't even begun to address that. So there's a lot more coming in the second half of this piece, which God willing we'll get to hopefully next year. In the meantime, Yasher Koach for everyone for joining in the learning this week in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Bo. God willing, B'ezras Hashem, we will learn together on next week's Parsha in the Zera Shimshon.